I'm David Drucker with the Washington Examiner, and thanks for joining us for a Texas Tribune Festival conversation. I am here with Congressman Michael Burgess, a physician from Texas, Congressman Brian Babin, a dentist from Texas, both Republicans. And gentlemen, I wanted to start by talking briefly about September 11th. We're broadcasting on September 11th, 2020. This is the 19th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C., and the Pentagon. I just wanted to talk to you about how you remember, each of you, about how you remember that day and what it has meant to your public service over the years. I'll start with Mr. Babin, just going in alphabetical order, BA to then BU. Sir, talk about what this day means to you.
Well, quite frankly, it's been a big day in our family for many, many years. In fact, several generations. My grandmother was born on September the 11th. My oldest daughter, was born on September the 11th. I've got a niece born on September the 11th. It's always been a big day. And then, of course, the horrible tragedy hit on 9/11 in 2001, and we've just, it's just a landmark that we should never, ever forget, just like Pearl Harbor Day on December the 7th. And we know that we have bad adversaries out there, and we know that we must be prepared. I think going forth, in fact, if you look at the 9/11 report, there's so many things that could have been done to avoid that, to head these people off, these terrorists off. And yet we missed the boat. We had a lot of warning signs, but we've made the corrections, I think, going forward since that time. And let's hope and pray that it never happens again. I want to just say how much I appreciate our government agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the intelligence. Various branches of our intelligence community, where we're not going to miss those signs anymore. And so I think the American people need to realize that we all need to be vigilant going forward. And again, every year on September the 11th, we have to be on our P's and Q's and be vigilant and aware that something else could happen, because these radical terrorists love to do things on anniversaries. But America is great and resilient. And you know what? The president, under President Trump's leadership, the latest radical Islamic group, ISIS, has had their caliphate completely destroyed. They're still out there. We have to be watchful, but we've made some great progress. So God bless America.
Congressman Burgess.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks for having us on. Thanks for doing this. 9/11, the remembrance of 9/11, 2001, significant for me. I was a regular guy, a doctor practicing medicine in Lewisville, Texas. Had just started a very lengthy operation that morning at 7:30, which was our operating room start time. I remember being concerned because there were a number of interruptions that kept coming into the room. A painter had fallen off a ladder, and I'm like, well, he needs to go down to the emergency room, don't bother us. And then someone came in and said a plane flew into a building in New York. I'm like, please stop bothering us with this stuff. We've got a very complicated operation going on. It's going to take a long time. We need to stay focused. But it wasn't too long after that, of course, the radio that was playing top 40 tunes switched over to the ABC broadcast, and clearly the severity of what was going on in the world outside of our little operating room became all too apparent. I will say that the day profoundly affected me in ways that I wouldn't have predicted. If someone had asked me theoretically, this is going to happen, what will be your response? Obviously, during the day after we finished the operation, talked to the family, got to the patient safely to the recovery room, and then joined with everyone else who was crowded around televisions and watching the drama play out. I had a son who was in the Air Force at the time, and I remember thinking, I'll bet he's already on his way somewhere. He's an enlisted man, not a pilot, but obviously they need to have their support personnel with them. I had been unable to reach him and figured that's what was happening. Of course, I was wrong. That all happened much later, but and began to question whether I was doing what I was supposed to be doing with my life. My country was attacked. My son's serving in the Air Force. What am I doing? And in the days and weeks and months that followed, really began to question what my role was. And then my current member of Congress announced he wasn't going to run for re-election that December. And for whatever reason, it seemed to me that that was the logical thing to do if I wanted to serve the country, would be to file and run for Congress. So I Googled, how do you run for Congress? Back in 2001. That wasn't easy to remember. I had to find a 12-year-old to help me understand the search engine. But it turns out it's not terribly hard to file to run for Congress, as Brian can attest. Very difficult to run for Congress, and especially running a medical practice at the time as I was. But that was now almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago this anniversary. And I will say it's been an unusual transition, but I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time.
I share both of your sentiments, and that it left an indelible mark on my life. I wasn't a journalist at the time, and the one thing that I'll always remember is it was the one morning in about 6 months that I chose not to put on the news as I got ready for work to head to my normal job. And it took a phone call from a friend of mine who said, "Are you watching what's happening?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" But it's also, I think, a good way to talk about how as a country over the last 2 decades we've gone and had to deal with multiple crises under multiple presidents, and we're dealing with another one today in the coronavirus pandemic. And there has been a lot of debate, let's say, over the right way for Congress to deal with, the right way for the president to deal with. Congressman Burgess, just continuing with you for a moment, I wanted to ask you first if you had a reaction to the revelations from Bob Woodward's forthcoming book, where the president apparently was aware, and he is quoted, and there are tapes where he was aware of the potential severity of the pandemic, but he did not want to cause a panic, as he said, and so chose to keep some of that information under wraps until a few weeks later. Are you pleased with the president's leadership throughout this? Do you think he could have acted sooner? And did you have any reaction to those revelations?
Well, of course, the reaction I have is, why in the world would anyone sit down with Bob Woodward for any length of time? But I want to be respectful of the fact that I'm being interviewed by a journalist. Look,
don't worry about me.
In January of this year, I mean, I was very concerned about the news reports that were drifting out of mainland China. They shut down an entire city of 10 million people, which I'd never seen that happen before. I'd never heard of the city before, to be perfectly honest, and they shut it down. We were briefed by all of the public health people that you would recognize that came to Congress. It wasn't an on-the-record briefing, unfortunately. It was about a members only. It wasn't classified, but it was members only. And the overwhelming sense that was imparted to us was that we got this. Look, 19 years ago, the SARS epidemic erupted, and we beat it with public health measures. We didn't have a vaccine. We didn't have an antiviral. We beat it with quarantine, contact tracing, and we feel confident about this one. I remember asking, were you really that good, or were you lucky? And one of the docs admitted that it was luck. And here's what we didn't know at the time was that very long latency period between the time you're exposed and carrying the virus and able to spread it and developing symptoms. So that 2-week interval. So everything, all of the preparation, and I know people talk about the what could or should have gone into preparation. We had just done the Pandemic All Hazard Preparedness Bill in our committee. The president had just signed it into law in June of 2019, 6 months before this pandemic hit. But all of that was geared toward pandemic flu, which is a different disease. Look, we've learned a lot about this coronavirus in the last 6 months. I think that is a testament to that is how well that our medical responders are doing with the survival rates today are far superior to what they were in the early days of this pandemic, but this was a tough problem from the get-go. But I don't feel like this was information that was being withheld from anyone, because as a Congress, we were briefed by all the public health people prior to the president's announcement of the travel ban. I was calling the White House and saying, please, can we restrict travel? I tried to get that with the previous administration when Ebola was percolating over in Western Africa, and I realized you could go on one of the travel websites and book a flight right now from Monrovia to DFW, and I thought, we need to put a stop to that. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't even entertain interrupting travel. Trump did it. He did it in a big way. The first time, and I remember Alex, the Secretary of Health, coming on the radio and saying, first time in 50 years we've enacted a travel ban from another country. That was huge. And thank goodness the president had the presence of mind to do that. I don't think he was withholding information when he put a quarantine on travel from mainland China.
Congressman Babin, I wanted to ask you about the vaccine. There has been a lot of discussion about when a vaccine might be ready. We know that pharmaceutical companies, multiple pharmaceutical companies in the U.S. and around the world, have been racing to come up with a vaccine that would be ready for wide distribution to the public as soon as possible. The Vice President Mike Pence, in his nomination acceptance speech at the Republican convention, said there would be a vaccine available by the end of the year. The president has been very optimistic that there might be a vaccine available as soon as the month of October at some point. I wanted to ask you how you felt about presenting rosy assessments about the availability of a vaccine, not the intent to want to deliver one as soon as possible, but given your background as a in the medical profession, if it is smart and proper to sort of make these pronouncements without having something more concrete to explain, given that we just saw AstraZeneca put a hold on its trials because one of the people in the trials had an adverse reaction. That's just one example that I know a lot of people are concerned about.
Well, I think just the very fact that we're hearing the president catch a lot of criticism and a lot of flack about trying to paint too rosy of a picture, and Dr. Burgess just addressed that. I think it's going to be an attack every day, probably up until the election on the president. He can do nothing right, according to the left. That's just the way it's going to be, and quite frankly, I think the fact that AstraZeneca has suspended their trials or put a pause on them just tells you that this Operation Warp Speed is working. We're hearing over and over again from the left, the Democrats, and much of the mainstream media say that the president is he's trying to paint a rosy picture and he's getting this vaccine out too fast, and they're not going to be doing this. It won't be safe and blah, blah, blah. But the very fact that they've suspended this shows that Operation Warp Speed is working. They're doing a lot of the development, research, the trials, the manufacturing processes are all going on simultaneously, which is unprecedented. And instead of taking years to develop, we're going to do this hopefully within a year. And quite frankly, if we come up with a vaccine that is pronounced safe, and I believe that the FDA is going to have they're going to follow the procedures just like they've always done, and they're going to when they approve it, it's going to be a safe vaccine. Now, that's not to say that we've seen in the past, we've seen therapeutics and drugs that have come out, medications that have been approved, and then they've been disapproved later, but. This just all tells you that the FDA they know what they're doing. The researchers, the folks that are working on Operation Warp Speed are doing a great job as far as I'm concerned. And I will take the vaccine. Once we get one that's pronounced safe, I will take it. I'm of the age that we have to be kind of careful in my generation of COVID. And so I have no problem with this. And as far as painting rosy pictures, I think you'd look back and compare President Trump, say, to Franklin Roosevelt after the Japanese attack, December the 7th, 1941. He gave a very, very serious speech to the House of Representatives. He didn't say that the world was coming to an end. He didn't say all would be doomsday. He was inspiring of the American people. And this is exactly what I think President Trump is trying to do, to alleviate fears, undue fears, to try to prevent creating some kind of a panic. I agree with what the president has done. I think this is just a cheap shot by Mr. Woodward, and he's part of a cadre of far leftists and Democrat sympathizers that are after President Trump no matter what he says, no matter what he does. The man has responded very, very quickly and I think effectively against the COVID pandemic. He was the first one. He suspended flights from China and later from Europe, and he was criticized of being a racist by some of his opponents on the Democrat side, notably Joe Biden, as being a racist. And then later, now just within the last few days, they're saying he didn't act soon enough. And if it was unintentional on the part of the Chinese of getting the pandemic and spreading it around the world, I would wonder why they were suspending flights and preventing flights out of Wuhan, China, into other parts of China. You couldn't fly from Wuhan to Shanghai to Beijing and other parts of China while they were allowing international flights to the United States, to Europe, and around the world. And also telling us that there was no danger of contagion between human to human, and when it really was. And then destroying records, destroying their specimens, and not letting us in on the some of the research that they'd been doing there at Wuhan, China. I think the president's doing a great job. I think that Operation Warp Speed is right on track, and I don't think it's a rosy picture. I think it's a true picture, and it's also got to remember good leaders inspire the folks they're leading, and I think this is exactly what it is.
And David, if
Congressman,
I may just add on,
go ahead.
Add on to that. In full disclosure, I went on the NIH website and volunteered myself for one of the clinical trials. I haven't been contacted yet, but I agree with Dr. Babin. I feel like this vaccine is being developed swiftly but safely. The transverse myelitis case that appeared in one of the trials, no one even knows if that's related to vaccine usage, but I think people can be comfortable and confident of the fact that it did interrupt the trial while this is figured out. I'm old enough to remember a swine flu vaccine that Gerald Ford mandated when I was in medical school that one didn't turn out so well. So I think the fact that they have been doing this with rigorous scientific standards, a problem's encountered. We don't know whether the problem is related or not. We're going to figure it out before we go forward. That's just exactly what I want to see a researcher do. But bear in mind, you got the two other candidate vaccines that are proceeding that have not had problems, and there's different platforms, there are different mechanisms that are being utilized. So I'm in line with what the president says. I do think there'll be an available vaccine in the month of October, late in the month of October. And bear in mind, you had the presidential nominees say no miracle is coming, but you've got Donald Trump, who signed legislation which gave people the right to try medicines. This was about a year and a half ago. So the contrast between the right to try, can do president, and the no miracle is coming candidate, to me, just couldn't be clearer.
Let me transition to another topic that has been that is often debated at the moment, and that is the civil unrest that has roiled communities across the country. A lot of the protests that have taken place, the peaceful protests, have been in response to the view among many, particularly Black Americans, but many white Americans, that the police do not treat Black Americans the same as they treat white Americans, that Blacks are treated unfairly in arrests and in police brutality incidents. Some of these protests have devolved into riots and looting and criminality, and we've seen communities go up in flames. Congressman Babin, I wanted to talk to you. Part of your district touches on Houston, a major metropolitan area. Do you believe that despite the fact that some have used these moments for rioting and criminality, that something needs to happen at the local level to deal with how police treat people of different races? Or do you think it's simply a case of a few bad apples in largely properly run police departments? And how do you feel the president should respond to the ongoing civil unrest?
Well, yeah, great question, David. I think there's you said it. There are bad apples in every profession. I served on our state board of dental examiners here in Texas for 6 years. They're not all dentists, are great folks. There's a very few that need to have their licenses suspended. There are going to be some bad apples in the police departments. I don't think for 1 minute that there is endemic racism in our police departments. Not for a second. And quite frankly, I think the knee-jerk reaction to some of these episodes that we've seen, like George Floyd, has been just an excuse to go out and try to unleash a smoldering Marxist movement under Antifa, and quite frankly, Black Lives Matters as well, to unleash socialism and anarchy onto America, to destroy our history, to destroy our great country's traditions and the rule of law. It is inexcusable. And I think that if you look, a lot of these police departments are actually the police chiefs, the commissioners. They are blacks themselves. So many are Hispanic. And several, and notably, there's been a couple of police chiefs that have resigned just in the last couple of days, and they were black because of frustration and the inability to be able to enforce the law. And they'll go out and make arrests, make their reports, and rather than have a case go forward for prosecution, we've seen Democrat prosecutors around the country drop the charges. And it's just outrageous, and I can understand the frustration that police departments have. Right here in Texas, the city of Austin has reduced their police department budget by $150 million. Inexcusable. I agree with our governor that says if the city of Austin cannot have a police department fully funded to take care and keep their citizens safe, the streets safe, then maybe we need to step up and start taking care of that. But the citizens of these, and basically we're looking the massive, huge majority of these areas that have had this civil unrest and riots, mayhem, murder, rapes, pillaging, burning down of small businesses have been Democrat controlled for many, many decades. And then to have this siren call that there's endemic racism and that these police departments should be reformed is just really, it's hypocrisy, because the Democrats have controlled these metropolitan areas and these big cities like Seattle and Chicago and New York and St. Louis for decades, and they've never lifted a finger to do the reforms that they're calling for today. So I think it's pretty hypocritical to hear this going on. And I'm telling you, I think people are very, very upset. They're afraid. And I think it's time to make America safe again. And I believe that under President Trump, who has offered on a daily, sometimes hourly basis to these mayors and these governors, where a lot of this unrest is taking place, offering to send in federal officers to help them, and only to be spurned and turned down and demonized as being a racist himself, is just outrageous. I think the American people know what's going on, and I think they're ready for law and order, and they're not ready for socialism and anarchy. And they want to see folks that are committing crimes held to account. And I think you're going to start seeing this a lot more often and prevalently.
Congressman Burgess, I'm going to give you a chance to comment on this, but I want to put you on the spot here, if you'll forgive me. The president is warning Americans that if Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, is elected president, then exactly what we're seeing in communities all over the country, in terms of the civil unrest is going to be prevalent, except that it's already happening now on the president's watch. So how do you explain to voters or constituents, and you're just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so maybe not quite as affected as an urban center, but how do you explain to people that everything that's happening now will get better if the same person is left in charge and it's happening on his watch?
Well, okay, first, do bear in mind that except in cases of extreme circumstances, there is not a federal role for the President of the United States to be in charge of policing our local jurisdictions. And look, when the very discouraging videos emerged of George Floyd's arrest and anything else surrounding that, facts yet to be determined. But the video itself was on its face terribly disturbing. And the president of the United States said so. And he was down in Florida with remember the launch of the private SpaceX, and offered the Department of Justice, if there's any way we can help, we want to be there for you. Now, the Attorney General of Minnesota is Keith Ellison, our former colleague in the House, someone who I, in fact, know. But Keith Ellison originally that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, was going to let the local DA handle the case. And it wasn't until the Attorney General Ellison himself was challenged on the Sunday shows, why aren't you putting yourself in charge of the prosecution? Only then did he say, I'm going to be in charge of this. But it was originally it was left up to the local prosecutors. Now, I'm not sure that Attorney General Ellison has not overcharged in the case. So people will be watching the trial very carefully. If he has overcharged and he can't prove the case, then that's going to be another setback, I fear, for the country. So I don't have a lot of confidence in the Attorney General in Minnesota, but that's what he's elected to do by the citizens of the state. And the local DA was elected by the good people of Minneapolis. Donald Trump, as the commander-in-chief, his options are limited. But I will also point out we are just on the cusp of losing our chief of police in Dallas, Texas. Not part of my district, but just south of me. And she, an African-American woman who had to make some decisions during the George Floyd protests, and many people in the community took exception to that, and now she's leaving the post. Her predecessor, Chief Brown, was on the job, on the watch, the day that 5 Dallas police officers were ambushed in downtown Dallas while they were providing protection for a Black Lives Matter march. And people forget that sort of data point, but it is important. Now, Chief Brown is up in Chicago, and he's got a different subset of problems, but it was, I will never forget those meetings with Chief Brown after his department had lost those 5 officers from being ambushed. It was July 7th, which to me is an important day because that's the end of your first week of internship. When you go from being a medical student to a doctor, and the doctors on the dock and the emergency rooms at Parkland and Baylor Hospital were like last week's medical students, but they did an exemplary job. But no, that's a tough thing. But the President of the United States is not the one who is the first responder in those situations. Our chiefs of police, our attorneys general, our district attorneys are the first responders. And Brian's right. In those jurisdictions, they've been run by Democratic politicians for years.
Gentlemen, I have just about a minute left, and I wanted to touch briefly on Texas politics because it is an election year, and we're just about 2 months away from Election Day. And really, with early voting, things are about to get underway even sooner. The polls in Texas between Trump and Biden have been very close. Gentlemen, you have colleagues in Republican-leaning districts that are having to fight for the first time, maybe ever. How confident are you that Texas will remain red this year? And can Republicans rest easy, or should they not take the state for granted? Congressman Burgess, I'll start with you.
Well, first, on the congressional level, we're not ceding any ground, and in fact, vigorously competing in those 2 districts that went from Republican to Democrat in the 2018 election. President Trump is going to run very strong at the top of the ticket. Of course, we no longer have straight ticket voting in Texas, so there is a good deal of voter education that has yet to be done by both parties. You can't just mark the top name on the ballot and walk out and think your job has been done. You've got to go all the way down the ballot to very crucial, not just congressional races, not just state rep races, but local races that were postponed in the time of the pandemic last May. So critically important election, but I do feel very good about Trump's chances at the top of the ticket. And I believe we're going to aggressively compete in some of those districts that we weren't able to hold in 2018.
And Congressman Babin.
Yes, sir, David. I can tell you that we will not be resting easy. We're going to be with our antenna up. We will be working extremely hard. We're trying to raise money. We're trying to help our colleagues that are in tough races and also our challengers that are running against Democrats in some of these seats. I think that the American people, I think the people of Texas, let me say that, have seen just what it would be like to live under the authorities of leadership of elected Democrats around the country. We've seen that in Seattle and Portland and Chicago and New York. And I don't think in fact, you're seeing a lot of these people leave these areas. Many of them are moving to the great state of Texas. And so I think folks want security. They vote for their pocketbooks. And we've had the best economy up until March when the pandemic hit us. We had the best economy in probably 60 years, 6 decades. And then, of course, a self-imposed recession because of the pandemic through no fault of any American. And I think you're going to see people vote for security, for their safety. And they're very concerned when they see the civil unrest, the assaults, the murders, burning buildings, small businesses destroyed. They're going to vote for law and order. And I feel very good. Certainly, we're never going to be resting easy, but we are going to be working hard. And I feel confident that we're going to prevail. Our biggest concern is these mail-in ballots, David. We've got millions of unsolicited mail-in ballots that are being mailed out in various states. And that is a absolute the best way for fraud. You cannot verify who signed them. You can't verify, the validity of them. And I think the states ought to be passing laws, making sure that these are mailed in on time, and they should not be counted after the close of the polls. They should be being counted beforehand, because you're going to have too much room for voter fraud in an election that could be stolen. And I hate to say that, but it is something that is of great concern to many of us and many Americans across this country, and also to the president. And we have to address that.
Congressman Brian Babin, Congressman Michael Burgess, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for this Texas Tribune Festival conversation. I'm David Drucker. See you next time.